She spilled wine on his suit and stole his seat in first class. What she did not know was that the man she humiliated owned part of the airline. 5 minutes later, her world began to fall apart, quietly and publicly. This is not just a story about a stolen seat. It is about dignity that did not flinch and power that did not need to shout. What happened after they landed left everyone in shock, especially her. Stay with this story. Because what began as silent humiliation ended in a moment the entire world would remember. There was a quiet tension in the air that morning at Memphis International Airport. The kind of stillness that comes just before something significant happens. Travelers bustled through the terminal, dragging wheeled suitcases behind them, sipping coffee, and staring into glowing screens. But one man walked differently. Calm, focused, dignified. Jasper Washington moved with the presence of someone who had earned every ounce of respect. A seasoned CO, a man whose journey had not been handed to him, but carved through a world that often told him he did not belong. Today his flight to New York was supposed to be routine, just another executive meeting to close another major deal. But nothing about what followed would be routine. As he stepped onto the aircraft, his eyes scanned the clean, softly lit interior. He nodded politely to a flight attendant, then proceeded toward the first-class section. Seat 2A, his seat. A quiet place near the window where he would gather his thoughts, prepare, and mentally run through his presentation. But as he approached, something stopped him. A woman was already sitting there. Legs crossed. Designer blanket draped across both seats like she owned the cabin. She did not even look up. Jasper paused. Then, in a calm, unwavering voice, he said, "Ma'am, that is my seat. 2A. She lifted her chin slowly. Her lips curled into a half-smile, not warm, not apologetic. Her voice was cold, almost amused. "These seats are taken," she said. Passengers nearby turned their heads. Whispers began. Someone lowered their phone slightly, angling the camera lens toward the unfolding scene. Jasper remained composed. But inside something stirred. Not anger. Not surprise. Just the familiar weight of a moment he had seen before too many times. The woman, whose name he would later learn was Kimberly Porter, adjusted her sunglasses and turned her head as if dismissing him entirely. No apology. No respect. Just entitlement served with a smirk. A flight attendant approached, trying to ease the tension. Her name was Heather. Blonde, polite, clearly flustered. "Excuse me, ma'am," Heather said, "we may need to check your boarding pass. This is Mr. Washington's assigned seat." Kimberly did not flinch. She pulled her blanket tighter around her lap. "I told you already, I need the window seat. I get anxious. I could have a panic attack if I sit anywhere else. You would not want that, would you?" Heather hesitated. Her training told her to remain professional, but her eyes showed frustration. "We can help you with that," she replied gently. "But we still need to honor seating assignments." The woman leaned back and sighed dramatically, loudly. Then, with the grace of a queen being asked to leave her throne, she began gathering her things. As she stood, she tilted her glass of red wine. It slipped. The liquid splashed across Jasper's tailored suit. A gasp rippled through the cabin. Silence followed. Was it intentional? Or was it truly an accident? No one said anything. But everyone felt something. Jasper looked down at his wine-soaked jacket. He said nothing. Not yet. He simply stepped aside and waited for Kimberly to gather her designer tote and shift to her assigned seat. As she passed, she muttered just loudly enough. "Unbelievable. Standards really are slipping everywhere." He heard her. Every word. But he did not respond. Instead, Jasper took his seat. Damp, humiliated, but composed. The red stain on his lapel was more than wine, it was a symbol. A reminder of how quickly dignity could be challenged in plain sight. He fastened his seatbelt as the cabin doors shut with a quiet thud. The plane began to taxi. But the real journey, the one no one had planned for, was just beginning. The engines hummed as the aircraft lifted gently into the air. Outside the window, clouds drifted lazily, soft as cotton. But inside the cabin, the tension had not disappeared. It had simply shifted, settling heavily like fog around Jasper's shoulders. He sat upright, his mind still reeling. His seat was his again, but his comfort was not. The red stain on his suit jacket had begun to dry, leaving a sour, lingering smell. Each breath reminded him of what had just unfolded. Across the aisle, Kimberly Porter reclined in her chair with theatrical grace. She sipped a fresh glass of white wine, unbothered. Her diamond earrings caught the light. Her voice rose above the quiet cabin. "Excuse me," she called to the attendant. "This is not sparkling water. I asked for Perrier." Is it truly so difficult? Heads turned. Not because of her complaint but because of how she said it, loud, sharp, entitled. Heather, the flight attendant, gave a tight-lipped smile and nodded, taking the glass back without a word. Jasper tried to focus on his tablet. He scrolled through the briefing slides for his upcoming negotiation. But the numbers blurred. His concentration dissolved beneath the weight of the moment. He remembered his grandfather's voice, deep and wise. Do not let them take your fire. Let your work speak. But never let your silence be mistaken for weakness. He closed his eyes. In that silence, memories swirled, every sideways glance, every time he was second-guessed in a boardroom, every time someone assumed he was not the one in charge. And now this. The deliberate disregard. The spilled wine. The blank stares from passengers who had seen it all and said nothing. A low voice broke through from the row behind. That is messed up, man. You paid for first class too. Jasper turned slightly and met the eyes of a middle-aged black man in a charcoal business suit. The man nodded, offering silent solidarity. Jasper returned the gesture with a grateful, if weary, smile. The woman to Jasper's left, a younger passenger with a laptop, leaned toward him slightly. I am sorry you have to deal with this, she whispered. He nodded again, saying nothing. Words were too fragile right now. And speaking would only give Kimberly the scene she wanted. But she was not finished. Moments later, as Heather passed through the cabin again, Kimberly lifted her wine glass and gestured, not toward her tray but toward Jasper. Are you really going to let him sit there after what just happened? She asked, her voice raised for everyone to hear. I do not feel safe. I would hate to be responsible if something happened to me mid-flight. Gasps rose from a few rows back. Some passengers stiffened in their seats. Others looked down, uncomfortable. Heather stopped in her tracks. Ma'am, she said carefully, her voice polite but firm. Mr. Washington has done nothing wrong. He is seated according to his boarding pass. You are both safe here. Kimberly's smile faltered. Her voice turned cold. My brother-in-law is on the board of this airline. If you do not take this seriously, I will make sure your job is reconsidered. Heather blinked, but her tone never changed. Our policies apply to everyone, ma'am, she said quietly. Kimberly stared at her, eyes hard. But this time no one rushed to support her. A shift was happening, small, almost invisible, but real. Jasper did not respond. He kept his gaze fixed on the clouds outside. But his fingers trembled. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small photo, creased and worn. His mother, standing proudly in front of their modest Memphis apartment. Beside her, his grandfather, arm draped over her shoulder. They had raised him to believe that dignity was not something given. It was something you carried even when others tried to take it from you. The hours stretched. Meal service came and went. Kimberly found something wrong with every course. This is dry. Do you all not understand what fine dining is? Her voice was crisp, biting. Passengers began exchanging glances. Some offered Jasper sympathetic smiles. Others simply looked away, unsure where to place themselves in the social battlefield unfolding above the clouds. The silence, Jasper thought, was more telling than the words. The quiet tension in the cabin had turned into a heavy hush. Even the hum of the engines felt distant, muted under the weight of what was unfolding. It was no longer just an uncomfortable flight. It had become something else. Something more symbolic. Kimberly Porter had not stopped. Her complaints had shifted from petty irritations to outright accusations. She whispered audibly to the passenger beside her. She motioned toward Jasper repeatedly, casting glances full of venom and performative fear. Then came the final escalation. She pressed the call button again. When the head flight attendant arrived, Kimberly did not lower her voice. This man is harassing me, she declared. I do not feel safe. I want him moved. A wave of discomfort rippled through the cabin. Passengers turned. Some leaned in to hear. Others sat frozen, unsure if they should intervene or pretend not to see. The attendant straightened her posture. Her eyes did not flicker. Miss Porter, several passengers witnessed what happened earlier. Mr. Washington has remained calm and respectful throughout the flight. There has been no harassment. Kimberly's face twisted in disbelief. Her voice cracked, shrill with outrage. You will all regret this. You have no idea who I am. Jasper said nothing. He had not uttered a single word since he took his seat. But the entire cabin had felt his presence. His stillness was not silence, it was power held in restraint. Moments later, the captain's voice came over the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, due to a customer service matter, in-flight service will be temporarily paused. We appreciate your patience. The words were neutral, but the message was clear. Something serious was happening. Passengers exchanged glances. Some pulled out their phones again. The atmosphere was no longer just awkward, it was electric. Jasper's phone buzzed. A message from the airline's executive office. He read it once, then again, and quietly stood from his seat. He walked toward the galley where 2 flight attendants and the captain waited behind a privacy curtain. Kimberly's eyes followed him, suspicious and sharp. In the small space near the crew's quarters, Jasper introduced himself. He spoke calmly but with quiet authority. "My name is Jasper Washington," he said. "I am one of the key stakeholders in this airline. And I believe we are witnessing something that demands more than just procedural professionalism." The captain listened, his face serious. "This is not about a seat anymore," Jasper continued. "This is about your staff being bullied. About the safety of your environment being used as a stage for personal bias. About passengers watching how your airline handles this moment, and what it says to every future traveler." He paused. "I will not raise my voice. I will not retaliate. But I will not allow this moment to pass without accountability." The captain nodded slowly. The weight of the situation settled on his shoulders. He did not offer platitudes. He simply said, "I understand." And with that, the course of the flight shifted, not just its destination but its story. When Jasper returned to his seat, passengers looked up. Some gave small nods. Others avoided his gaze, unsure where they stood. But one thing had changed. The airline had heard him. They had listened not because he raised his voice but because he had raised the bar. As the flight neared its final descent, the captain made a second announcement. "Due to a customer service incident, our aircraft will remain at the gate momentarily upon landing. We thank you for your cooperation." There was no panic. Just quiet understanding. Kimberly looked around, eyes narrowing. Her confidence faltered. This was not the script she expected. Jasper leaned back in his seat. Not to relax but to hold his ground. He had been pushed, provoked, humiliated, but never broken. Now, his restraint was becoming something louder than rage. The clouds outside the window parted as the plane began its descent. But inside, the most powerful movement was just beginning. The wheels of the plane touched the runway with a smooth, rolling thud. A collective exhale passed through the cabin. It was the kind of release that usually meant the journey was over. But for many on board, the real destination had just appeared on the horizon. The aircraft taxied slowly, guided toward the gate. Passengers remained seated, but the mood had shifted. No one reached for their bags. No one unbuckled early. Even the usual chime of arrival sounded different, tense, uncertain. Jasper sat quietly, his hands folded. There was no need to prepare for what came next. He had already done his part with poise, patience, and purpose. The jet bridge locked into place. But the doors did not open right away. Instead, 2 uniformed airline officials appeared just outside the aircraft. They stepped onto the plane moments later, calm and composed, joined by a senior crew manager. All eyes turned as they walked directly toward Kimberly Porter. She blinked in surprise. Her lips parted, ready to speak, but for once, no words came out. "Miss Porter," one of the officials said, his tone respectful but firm. "We need to speak with you regarding your conduct on this flight. Please gather your belongings and step with us to the jet bridge." Kimberly's mouth tightened. "This is ridiculous," she snapped. "I did nothing wrong." The official remained still. "This is not a discussion, ma'am. This is procedure. You will be escorted for further questioning." Kimberly's hands shook as she shoved her blanket aside. She stood, snatching her handbag from the overhead bin, and turned sharply to Jasper. "You did this," she hissed. Justice had not screamed. It had whispered. And it had arrived. Inside the aircraft, the mood began to thaw. Tension lifted, replaced by quiet approval, even admiration. Heather, the flight attendant, walked up to Jasper. She bent down slightly, her voice sincere. "Mr. Washington," she said, "on behalf of this crew and this airline, I want to thank you. For your patience. For your strength." Jasper gave a small nod. He did not need applause. He never had. Passengers began to rise. Some approached him with kind words, subtle gestures, silent gratitude. One elderly woman reached out and touched his arm. "Bless you, son. My grandson is going to grow up in a better world because of people like you." A young black woman in the back row waited until he stepped into the terminal. She caught up to him, her voice trembling slightly. "You showed more strength than most people could ever carry," she said. "Thank you. For all of us." Jasper smiled. Not broadly, but deeply. Beyond the terminal glass, the sunlight touched down gently on the runway. It was the same Memphis sky, but it felt different now. Within the hour, videos taken by passengers had already begun spreading online. Clips of Kimberly's outburst. Clips of her removal. Clips of Jasper's silence. The internet reacted fast. News outlets picked up the story. Headlines began to appear. CEO racially targeted on flight, responds with quiet strength. Viral confrontation sparks airline accountability. Passenger removed after attempted intimidation of executive stakeholder. But Jasper did not chase the headlines. He headed straight to his meeting, now wearing a different suit, borrowed last minute, slightly tight at the shoulders. He walked into the boardroom, greeted by clients who had seen the news before he arrived. He closed the deal. Flawlessly. Without mentioning the flight. But something had shifted beyond the business win. Later that evening, the airline released a public statement. They apologized to Jasper Washington. They acknowledged the flight staff's professionalism. And they announced immediate changes. New anti-bias training. Revised passenger behavior protocol. Clear disciplinary actions for harassment on board. Kimberly Porter, once a privileged flyer known in social circles, was permanently banned from the airline. Her connections were reviewed and quietly severed. The face once seen reclining in first class now trended across media for all the wrong reasons. Not as a victim, but as a warning. A warning that the age of entitlement was facing its reckoning. By nightfall, the video had become a headline. And by morning, it had become a movement. Clips from the flight appeared on nearly every social media platform. People shared their own experiences, stories of humiliation in silence, of being told to sit down, to take less, to not make it as seen. But now they had seen what quiet strength looked like. They had seen it with their own eyes. Jasper Washington's face appeared not on television screens because he shouted, but because he did not. He never once raised his voice. And yet the world had heard him. Comment sections flooded with words like dignity, grace, and power. Strangers posted messages of support. Young professionals said they saw a reflection of themselves in Jasper's restraint. Mothers thanked him for showing their sons how to stand tall without aggression. One post stood out. A teenager had written, "I used to think staying calm meant being weak. Not anymore." And that was the moment Jasper understood. This had never been just about one seat. Not about whine or whispered insults. Not even about policy. It was about permission. Permission for others to stand without having to shout. Permission to take up space without apology. Permission to choose dignity and still win. The airline kept its promise. They announced an internal review of how complaints were handled in the air. New modules were added to crew training. A hotline was created for passengers to report discrimination directly to corporate. And in a quiet room days later, at a board meeting Jasper attended, the CEO of the airline said something he had never expected to hear. "You reminded us that silence can be dangerous, but it can also be powerful. You reminded us who we serve." Jasper nodded. No speech. No theatrics. He just continued doing the work. A few weeks later, as the news cycle moved on, Jasper received a handwritten letter. It was from a flight attendant, not Heather, but another crew member who had witnessed everything. She wrote, "You probably do not remember me, but I remember you. I remember how you never once made anyone feel small, even when you were the one being wronged. I changed how I speak to passengers because of you. I stand taller because of what I saw." He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into the same wallet where he kept that worn photo of his mother and grandfather. He carried it like a compass. Not to remind himself of what happened, but to remind himself why it mattered. At another airport weeks later, a stranger stopped him. "You are the guy from the flight, right?" the man asked, awestruck. Jasper smiled. "I was just a passenger," he replied. But inside he knew that was no longer true. He had become more than a name on a boarding pass. He had become a symbol. Not of defiance but of resolve. Of what happens when the seat you take is not just physical but historical. And still he never once claimed to be a hero. He never needed to. The world did not remember the flight number. It did not remember the exact time or gate. But it remembered the moment. The moment a man sat in his rightful seat, soaked in red wine, staring straight ahead as the storm of privilege raged beside him. And he refused to move. Not with anger. Not with shouting. But with stillness. That moment had echoed far beyond the cabin walls. Beyond terminals and headlines. It had reached office break rooms, kitchen tables, classrooms, courtrooms, and corner stores. Because everyone knew someone who had been Jasper. Or they had been him. They had been told to sit somewhere else. To lower their voice. to wait their turn while someone else skipped the line and called it earned. But Jasper had shown the world what it looked like when someone refused to disappear. When someone stayed visible, stayed calm, and stayed true. He reminded people that being silent did not mean being small. That composure could be revolutionary. And the thing that made it so powerful? He never set out to make a statement. He simply refused to be erased. For the thousands who had endured quieter versions of that flight, for the woman passed over in a boardroom, for the boy accused before he was heard, for the mother who was doubted at the clinic desk, this story became a lantern. Not the loud kind. The kind that burns slow, steady, and refuses to go out. Kimberly Porter, for all her confidence and connections, had underestimated something. The world was changing. And it no longer bowed to arrogance in designer shoes. It responded to integrity. The flight sheet, he had not just claimed his seat. He had claimed the right to exist, to lead, to be. Without justification. And for those watching, those who had held their breath in rooms where they were not welcomed, his story did something rare. It restored breath. It said, you do not have to prove your humanity. You already are enough. It said, sit down not in submission but in strength. As Jasper exited that terminal weeks ago, long after the media circus had faded, he noticed something small. A man in a janitor's uniform gave him a quiet nod. A nod that said, I saw what you did. No cameras. No press. Just a quiet exchange between two people who understood that courage does not need applause to be real. And Jasper, wearing a suit just slightly off size, but shoulders straighter than ever, smiled back. Because he knew. Change had happened. Not because of policy. But because one man refused to leave his seat.